Shandu. And let me just tell you guys a bit about her. She's just been, I've had the pleasure of working with her and trying to help her with her talk a little bit and do it. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with her. And yeah, I'm really excited for you guys and for what's coming next. And I know she'll do a great job. So just a bit about her. She graduated from UCT with a degree in politics and international relations, but then found her inner data analytics nerd and did some courses through MIT on machine learning and became a machine learning specialist, and also has experience in data analysis. And she also runs her own company, and she got her clients, and yeah, she seems to be doing pretty damn well. Shout out for women power right there. Yeah. So yeah, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Shandu. Yeah, I think you just have to do I have to stop screen sharing or something?
I'll try speech.
Cool.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jacques, for such an informative talk. I was like, we definitely share the same sentiments. So it's definitely such a privilege to follow after that talk. That was very insightful. So thank you for that. Can everyone see the screen and hear me perfectly?
Yeah, I think just full screen there.
Oh, yes, sorry about that.
The presentation, cool.
Okay, well, I'm just going to jump into it really. But behind the power of technology and behind every massive data set are people. So hello, my name is Shandu Nthai. I am the CEO and founder of African Nova Solutions. But most importantly, I am a data analytics nerd. And basically, this is my story. So a while back, I actually got the privilege to participate in the MIT machine learning program, where I got a deep understanding of machine learning and its implications. And through this program, I actually got the chance to play around with with my first facial recognition technologies and tools. And funny enough, these were some of the results. So according to this particular tool, I'm not going to name the tool, but I am an extremely confident person with a nice score of 84%. And I'm also a very joyful person, according to this tool. But also the amazing thing about this facial recognition tool, it actually just identified the fact that I am a human, that I have hair, skin, lips, and I found it very funny that it found out that I'm wearing a lace front wig in my photo, which I found very progressive. So shout out to this particular tool for picking that up. And that's just some of the code that's associated with the whole tool and everything. And at first, naturally, I thought this was so cool. But to be very honest, I didn't really want to dwell on the results of this exercise because honestly, I was more concerned about handing in my assessments and on time for the program. But later on in the program, I actually got the opportunity to attend a lecture on the applications of machine learning. More specifically, its use in the American criminal justice system and how law enforcement agencies are now using facial recognition technology to help identify suspects, for example, and how machine learning algorithms are being used by law firms to help predict a judge's verdict. But after that, I began to think a bit more about the American criminal justice system as a whole, and the many issues in which plague the system, like the disappropriate amount of African-American males in which make up the prison population, or the fact that African-Americans are receiving harsher sentences compared to their white counterparts. And it's actually in this exact same moment when I'm taking in all this information, and I decided to go ask good old Google a very simple question. Can algorithms be biased? Which threw me into the world of algorithm bias. So since the advent of computing, big data and machine learning algorithms have proven to infiltrate and influence every aspect of our social and economic lives. These new data-driven systems have also proven to hold tremendous potential to bring about tangible change and to empower communities all around the world, while holding the game-changing promise to do things like improve efficiency, bring down costs of companies, accelerate research, and any developmental efforts. Tools like AI are now being used to screen job candidates, to assist in diagnosing diseases, to help identify criminal subjects, and to help to determine a person's credit score or their access to credit. So the biggest question we have right now is, what actually is algorithmic bias? So algorithmic bias is best described as the lack of fairness in which emerges from the output of a computer system, or in this particular case, from an algorithm. This lack of fairness can be summarized as a discrimination of one group based on a special categorical distinctions made by an algorithm. So actually, algorithmic bias can take forms in several forms. It can come in the form of racial bias, age discrimination, and gender bias. Now, the biggest thing that I want to emphasize right now is that we need to understand that algorithms and technologies and systems are made by people, and more than often white males, as the tech industry still remains a male-dominated industry that is dominated by white males. Now, I'm mentioning this not to slander white males within the tech industry, but to highlight the fact that as creators of these algorithms and systems, they themselves inherently carry bias, whether that bias is conscious or unconscious. And it is this inherent bias in which is often reflected and embedded in the algorithms in which they create. And when I say, I'm not closing off just white males, but I'm just saying any developer and any person who's operating in the tech space. So, and this is also coupled with the fact that most AI algorithms also make use of a lot of historical data. And because we're using so much historical data to train these models, what we're ultimately doing in theory is ultimately training these AI models to perpetuate dangerous biases in which already exist within the societies, biases in which already have real life implications. So what, can you give me an example of that? Okay, cool. So if you don't know, every day we're getting scored, and it's these scores in which ultimately determine stuff like who gets hired, who gets a loan application, for example. Therefore, we're creating and living in a society in which AI algorithms are ultimately making prediction of the trajectory of our lives. So as we speak about the future of work and how AI will replace many jobs, for example, we cannot forget that as it stands, that algorithms are now serving as gatekeepers for current jobs. This argument is best seen in a software called HireVue. Now, HireVue is an HR facial recognition technology in which I've personally experienced myself. So through a video interview, the software is able to pick up on verbal and non-verbal cues in order to determine things like seen earlier before, confidence levels, to determine factors like the emotional engagement of an applicant or problem-solving style of the applicant. And based on all these cues and all this data that the software collects, the candidate is then given a score out of 100. And it's based off that score that is then used to decide if a candidate will get a job or not. Now, what are some of the issues that might arise from such a video software? Well, sometimes your face doesn't always recognize. If you have a Snapchat filter, your face won't always recognize your face, especially as coming as a person of color. It won't always recognize your face, therefore also implicating your score indirectly. But another big thing about the same models that are used to inform these softwares is that they're trained on current top performers of a company, i.e. the historical data of the company and its top performers. And especially in a South African context, that has a lot of implications. Now, besides that, from the outset and the outside of it all, this concept and the software sounds amazing, right? Because now a company is able to get through a lot more applicants, interview a lot more people, and ultimately accelerate the hiring process, which is anyone who works in HR's dream. So what can be bad about such a software is the question that we're facing right now. Well, I actually just want to bring your attention to an incident that recently happened at Amazon. And I'm saying that because you can go research it. So Amazon recently scrapped an internal project that was trying to use AI algorithms to vet job applications. Now, the intention behind the project was innocent. It was just simply to accelerate the current hiring processes through a software in which could process up to 100 CVs and spit out the top five best candidates and CVs in the system. And based off those best 5 candidates, obviously some would be hired and some would even just get automatically hired based off their CV. And after some time, the project was eventually scrapped because it had been found to be biased towards female candidates, as the software had consistently downgraded female candidates. And now it draws us back to the fact that because AI systems learn to make decisions by looking at the data, more specifically is fed by that historical data, they then often perpetuate existing biases. In this particular example, the bias that was found was the bias that was put into the software, so to speak, was the bias of the male-dominated working and tech world. Now, if I'm a male coder and I'm thinking, okay, what are the top skills that I need to, to get this job or to maintain this job, I'm not really going to think about a female. I'm going to think about the best skills in me as a male developer and as a person who works in a male dominated industry. But and that's the key here, is that that's the biggest bias here. But just to also highlight, it was later discovered that the program actually went on to penalize applicants who attended all-girls schools, for example, and any CV or application that contained the word woman or female. Now, I don't know about you guys, but this makes me feel extremely uncomfortable, as I attended an all-girls school, and I was actually one of the first female deputy presidents of the UCT Entrepreneur Society. And personally, I can't imagine not getting a job because of the wording in my CV, more specifically because of a natural language processing algorithm in which was made by a small group of males. Now, personally, I do not think that the male developers set out to develop an algorithm that discriminates against women. But I think it was a moment in which it highlighted the fact that currently there is a severe lack of critical perspective in the design and the development process of all these algorithms that drive these huge technologies. So let's unpack this topic a bit more. What's another example of how, these algorithms can affect our lives? Oh, apologies. Let's just see here. Apologies. Oh, there you go. So another example of this is actually when South African banks are increasingly investing in AI to help make loan decisions, for example. So the data in which is collected is made, and the data in which is collected and which the decision is made on is based on, firstly, the loan history of an applicant and the demographic data of applicants whom loan officers have historically accepted or rejected. And it's this data in which is used to train algorithms to determine a new loan applications and access to credit. Although the race and the gender of the data of applicants is not explicitly captured by these companies, studies have shown that AI algorithms use location data and the habits of an applicant to predict the race and the gender of an applicant. So therefore, we're then again creating a scenario where an applicant can be discriminated against based off their race or gender, because obviously in terms of gender, for example, a woman, they would say maybe women spend too much, or there's certain biases associated with certain gender or race. So it's no secret that access to finance for business and home loans in South Africa is not equal, with race and gender still posing as significant barriers for everyone. So, for example, a huge bank just last year, a huge bank, I won't name the bank, had basically a court case where over 4,000 bank customers claimed that they were charged 30% more than their white counterparts on mortgage loans. Now, it can really be argued that, as developers and, as CEOs of companies and as people who work in the tech space, that, we develop and create these algorithms and these technologies and these apps, we kind of expect them to create a bit more fairness, because the biggest major thing that we're doing in the process, especially when it comes to giving bank loans, is removing that human bias element that's associated with this practice. But this and actually, if you take a close look, this is not really the case, because especially in a South African context where your historical data is being used to feed these models and feed these algorithms, that data is in a South African context, it reflects the data and the story of our apartheid and our racist past. So once again, while all these technologies seem amazing and seem to have the hopes to remove all these biases, they actually are just perpetuating them. And the banking sector cannot abdicate responsibility by thinking that technology will change the legacy of the issues associated with financing with people of color and women. So I feel like I've kind of painted quite a bleak kind of picture right now. So what is the way forward? And personally for me, I would argue that the way forward includes implementing cultures of inclusive coding. So what does inclusive coding look like? It's a culture that embraces creating a full spectrum of teams with diverse individuals that are made up of both male and females from various races, genders, religions, cultures, who check up on each other's blind spots, but also go as far as to continue to build platforms in which can identify bias, platforms in which will also help us audit existing software, but also creating more inclusive data training sets, but most importantly, thinking more consciously about the social impact of the technology in which we develop. As we are the essential component of the overall solution to this issue. And the solution starts with us. There's a saying that I always carry personally myself, which says that, with power comes great responsibility. So as developers, as future CEOs, and as more socially conscious individuals, we must recognize that we have the power. We have a lot of power. We are the ones creating the software. We are the ones implementing them. But with that same power comes a great responsibility, which requires us to be more conscious, to call out biases, and to have a deeper hand and a more inclusive hand in the future we want to unlock with the power of technology. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Shandu. That was I am just literally shook, because if I can just say, I had an experience where I attended a Microsoft Build conference last year, and their facial recognition tool identified me as male. But luckily, they came back to me, apologized, fixed the problem. But the problem wasn't so much that the facial recognition did a bad job, it's the data set. It's how they're training their models. So they're constantly training it with white males. So there's not enough inclusion in that space. There's not enough representatives of different types of people. There's no African hair that's being shown, none of that. But anyway, I really, really love to talk. If anyone has a question, please just raise a hand, or so I can just know where you are, and then just unmute yourself, and then we can just start with the topic. But I just also want to mention here in the comments and the chats, Rupert said something about how people that are training models using TensorFlow and so forth, that whatever they're training it on is bias itself. So the material itself is skewed, and that he guesses that the question comes in, how do we ensure that all these AIs are then trained on unbiased data sets? And then he's guessing that if you want a very accurate AI, you want a very large data set, which is true. And that he's assuming that then these bias algorithms exist because companies are not spending enough time looking at the data sets. That is true as well. So they're getting the result that they're looking for, but it's a very narrow result. So yeah, that definitely needs to change. Getting a lot of great talks. Kudos.
To that point, even at Stanford right now, Stanford is they're kind of leading the AI machine kind of learning spectrum. And literally 2 weeks ago, they ran a workshop in which they identified that, you know, this space of bias algorithms and bias data set is uncharted waters. So it's not to shut everyone down and to bash them down. It's about really just stopping thinking, and that's what they wanted to emphasize in that workshop, was that we are all walking into uncharted waters, and that's why we need more inclusive coding. We need more females to come and, you know, represent you know, technologies. I feel like a great example of a piece of technology that represents females is Bumble. I don't know if people are aware of Bumble, but Bumble, for those people who don't know, Bumble is a dating app in which is basically the CEO is a female, and she found that you know, going on other dating apps for her was it was unsettling. She didn't feel empowered, and she felt like she didn't have control over everything that was going on with her kind of dating journey. So what she did, she created Bumble. And this allows the woman to first approach the man as opposed to the man approaching the woman. And that's a great example of the type of technology in which, you know, kind of just emphasizes the woman's voice and the woman's experience, but also is an opportunity for them to empower women. So there's lots of space for innovation. Absolutely. So yeah, just to add to that.
Absolutely. And I think another good point would be that even the people that are currently creating those data sets, the data scientists and so forth, that are training these algorithms and using these models on TensorFlow, for example, that they need to also educate themselves. So recognize your privilege and do something about it. So it's very important to continuously learn as well as people. So I think that'll definitely help us move in the right direction.
100%.
And I'm guessing there's not more questions, unless if Adrian, you have something to add.
Yeah, I actually have a thought. So let's tread carefully. But so Prodigy, a colleague of mine, I've been advertising these talks, of course, to my colleagues, and one of our data scientists reached out to us, and he said, you know, that we have a real challenge as a company, and I'm glad that, you know, it's spoken about, so that's a good thing, right, up front. But we have a challenge because, like, the students that we get from Central Africa, they in the past have had a 20% default rate, right? And now the question is like, well, you know, how do we distinguish between good and bad borrowers, because we don't have the data? So I guess the question is, like, if you don't have the data, like, and you're training models on it, you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to maybe put some leniency into the data, or, you know, that's a very difficult question, you know, like, what about data bias, right?
We've got a question, sorry, Shandu. We've got a question from Lori. I believe they're asking, where must changes be done to prevent algorithmic biases? On which level? Data or the idea behind the data? How do we fix this?
That's a great question, and I really think that sometimes we also overthink things. So let's say you're faced with the task of just creating a new app, and, you know, you start bringing all the tools that needed for the app, all the data and everything, and it just takes us somewhere, say, oh, but if we look at the data, it only is showing us one group of people. But what if we try to incorporate this new group of people, or try to outsource a developer from another company who's of color or something to come and collaborate with us? Because also another thing we learned was that, you know, once you also in business and also in just creating these apps, you're also closing off a market when you're not including these data and when you're not making technology that is inclusive. So it really is just highlighting things like that. Hey guys, we're actually looking at what we've done. This is what we've produced, and maybe we can make a few changes here, and being open to that change. Obviously, we don't have any of the answers, especially in South Africa, where a lot of the data of people of color is not there. We don't have the data, and it's going to take a lot of time for us to create that data. But really, it's just resignated in. Be conscious of it, call it out, and do the little things that change. That say, oh, before you launch that facial recognition tool, can you try it on my friend, or can you try it on a person who has a darker skin tone? It really is just little small changes and thinking that can really make the biggest difference, in my opinion.
Absolutely. We've got another question over here, and they're asking, are there any approaches to examining data sets before using them, used in trading sessions to discover subtle biases? That's one question. Another question that they're asking is, are there any local companies that are able to audit your findings to ensure you are not making decisions on biased results?
Great questions. So there aren't any local companies, as Jacques also pointed out. We are in uncharted waters, and I think that's what everyone needs to understand. But what they say about any disaster is that that's a space for innovation. Make a company that audits the software, and know that, and you will profit from that. So take that what you will. Yeah. So but there's nothing currently. There's nothing to kind of audit. It's all uncharted waters, and I think that's the biggest thing I want to emphasize.
Okay, and then do you maybe think that there are any approaches to maybe examine these data sets before people start using them?
I think it boils down to having a more inclusive team that is representative, that it represents, so if not just that represents a whole spectrum of people. I think that's the only way, and having the conversation with them. That's the biggest step that I personally think that can be done right now.